When I visited home and saw the new family mural, I stood frozen. They had literally painted me out of it, like I never existed. So I quietly left behind a ledger, detailing every dollar, every sacrifice, and every lie they'd rather forget. Now they can't ignore me anymore. On that Thanksgiving evening, I noticed a fresh family portrait. My likeness had been removed, replaced by a tree. Not a single comment was made. Following the meal, I handed my parents an account book, instructing them to review it later. They disregarded my words. My mother's hands trembled, and my father's coffee grew cold. I entered the main entrance of the house where I grew up, the well-known creak of the wooden floorboards welcoming me like a familiar companion. It was Thanksgiving, and the atmosphere resonated with the aroma of herbs and cooked fowl, a comforting mist that once signified security. I removed the autumn coolness from my jacket, placed it on the hanger, and faced the dining area. That's when it appeared, a vibrant, striking painting stretching across the wall like an announcement. My breathing hitched. It depicted my relatives in bright colors, my mother with her restrained smile, my father with his wide frame, my brother Ethan beaming as if he'd just claimed a victory. But I was absent, not indistinct, not relegated to a corner, simply missing. In my stead, a common tree stood, its limbs twisting where my features ought to have been, its roots embedding themselves in the space I once held. I remained motionless, gazing at the vacant area. The artwork was not a quick drawing. It was intentional, expertly done, its hues vibrant with self-satisfaction. My mother hurried by, her apron lightly dusted with flour, murmuring about the sauce. "Supper's nearly prepared," she announced, avoiding my gaze. My father ambled in from the workshop, his hands soiled from working on something, and offered a slight nod, barely a look. Ethan reclined on the sofa, scrolling through his device, either unaware or uninterested. No one mentioned the painting, they didn't need to. It was displayed there like an award, evidence of the family they wished to perceive, the one that excluded me. A dull discomfort tightened in my chest, expanding as my gaze followed the tree's contours. I had traveled 3 hours to arrive, carrying a pie I had prepared myself, convincing myself that this year might unfold differently. Yet that artwork was not an error, it was a decision. And as I stood there, the scent of sage becoming acrid in my mouth, I understood this Thanksgiving would not conclude with dessert and pleasantries, not for me. The painting was not an isolated incident. It was a single mark in a recurring theme I had experienced indefinitely. At the age of 12, I secured victory at the regional science exhibition, a cumbersome miniature rocket held tightly in my grasp, my face alight as I telephoned home to share the news. My mother responded, preoccupied, remarking, "That's pleasant, dear," before ending the call as Ethan's football match was commencing. I remained at school, the gymnasium gradually emptying, until a caretaker drove me home. They never brought it up again, no celebratory meal, no expressions of pride, merely Ethan's soiled athletic shoes on the surface and my father's detailed account of the decisive score. My rocket collected grime in the workshop. When I was 16, I discovered a summer computer programming workshop, costing $300, an opportunity to create something tangible. I sat at the kitchen counter, the application in my hand, and inquired if they could assist. My father scrutinized the document as if it were an invoice, stating, "Funds are limited, child, perhaps in the following year." I assented, suppressed the hurt, and tended to lawns throughout the summer to finance it independently. That festive season, Ethan unboxed a video game system, a sleek, $1,400 device with an illuminated controller. My mother embraced him, declaring, "You've earned this." I received a hooded sweatshirt from the discount section, still irritating with its label attached. I ceased making requests thereafter. The slights accumulated, subtle yet piercing. At 17, when I fractured my arm after falling from a bicycle I was repairing myself, they did not come to the emergency room. Ethan had a debate competition and priorities, my father later explained, were what they were. I learned to schedule my own medication reminders, limping through solitary weeks. Meanwhile, every significant event in Ethan's life received prominent attention: an automobile for his 18th birthday, a celebration upon his university acceptance, despite my having completed my degree with distinction the preceding year and only receiving a perfunctory, "Well done," by telephone. I convinced myself I was content, that I didn't require their encouragement to persist. However, contentment differs from completeness. Reflecting now, I perceive it distinctly. They didn't merely disregard me, they constructed an existence where I had no place. I had consistently been the obscure figure, the child who didn't grumble, who facilitated their devotion of everything to Ethan. By the time I arrived at their residence this Thanksgiving, that painting felt less like a surprise and more like an affirmation. The discomfort in my chest was not novel. It was aged, smoothed by years of endurance. Yet something else stirred beneath it now, a gradual warmth I couldn't yet identify, not quite fury, perhaps the dawn of comprehension. For, standing in that dwelling, dessert cooling in my grasp, I understood I was not the tree they depicted me as, unfeeling, silent, merely occupying space. I was something distinct, something they had never bothered to observe, and that, I recognized, was on the verge of transformation. The meal area hummed with the sound of cutlery and strained merriment as I settled into my chair, the artwork casting its presence behind me like a quiet arbiter. My mother hurried in with a serving dish of golden, steaming turkey, doting over Ethan's portion. "You require the vitality, Ethan, for a significant role, a substantial life," she cooed, adding more dressing. My father carved with flair, beaming at Ethan's narration of his recent advancement, a minor position at a technology firm he'd secured via an acquaintance. "That's my son," my father declared, patting his shoulder. I received a tepid, "Good to see you," thrown my way as an incidental remark before they re-immersed themselves in Ethan's affairs. I idly stirred my mashed potatoes, the sauce gathering like the obstruction in my throat. Midway through, my mother dashed to the kitchen and reappeared with 2 foil-covered presents. "A small holiday treat," she chirped, handing one to Ethan. He unwrapped it, a personalized leather coat, supple and smooth, the kind that cost more than my monthly housing payment. "For your new professional atmosphere," my father stated, winking. Ethan put it on, beaming as my mother captured a picture. Then she passed the other gift to me, smaller and lighter. I unrolled it, a thin, man-made gray neckwear, its $5.99 label still dangling. "Thought it would provide warmth," she commented, already redirecting her attention to Ethan. I folded it on my lap, the inexpensive material irritating my skin, and remained silent. Ethan didn't even spare a glance. He was too engrossed in messaging someone about the outerwear. The gathering prolonged, a spectacle for which I had no role. My mother raved about Ethan's new city dwelling, how she'd assisted in selecting the drapes. My father boasted about the startup's equity options as if it were his own triumph. I ate in quiet, the poultry tasting bland. No one inquired about my profession, independent programming, assembling odd jobs to cover expenses, or the pie I had brought, still untouched on the counter. The sole query came from my father, mid-bite. "Still operating that old compact car?" I nodded, and he grunted, moving on. It signified, "We no longer recognize you, and we won't inquire." I didn't perceive the quiet. My gaze repeatedly wandered to the painting. Ethan's depicted smile taunted me, prominently featured, while that accursed tree occupied my rightful place. It wasn't merely the void that pained me. It was the satisfaction in its presentation, the way it adorned the space like a lineage symbol. No one spoke of it, not once. Perhaps they believed I wouldn't discern it, or perhaps they were indifferent if I did. Regardless, the oversight resonated more loudly than the conversation. As my mother cleared dishes, humming about sweet dishes, a cool indignation settled within me, not the intense burst I'd experienced as a child, but something more acute, more constant. I wasn't unintentionally unseen, I was intentionally removed. And seated there, the neckwear crushed in my hand, I realized I could no longer tolerate it. The pie might remain uneaten, but I would not depart this residence without delivering a statement of my own. Several months prior to Thanksgiving, I was searching through a miscellaneous drawer in my dwelling for a spare key when a creased envelope drew my attention. It was an aged bank record, faded yet readable, addressed to me from a savings account I didn't recognize. My identity was linked to an educational fund of $15,000, initiated during my childhood, intended for my future. However, the balance was zero, emptied 5 years ago, around the period I was struggling to afford tuition. My gut churned. I had been unaware of its existence. No one had informed me. I sat there, fixated on the figures, a queasy sensation ascending my back. I telephoned my mother the following day, my voice firm despite the slight tremor in my hands. "Hello, what is this account I discovered? Was it mine?" She hesitated for an extended moment, then dismissed it with a laugh. "Oh, that old thing? It was for everyone, darling, household matters, urgent needs. You didn't lose out." Her tone was airy, as if she were brushing away trivialities. I pressed further. "Emergencies such as what?" Another pause. "Well, it aided Ethan's overseas studies in Italy, recall? We couldn't permit him to forego that." I ended the call without a farewell, the components of the puzzle aligning. Italy, during his junior year, when I was working dual shifts at an eatery, consuming instant noodles to finance community college because they had stated they couldn't assist. I searched online and located the bank's documentation. With a few phone calls and a password reset, I found that withdrawals began when I was 19, authorized by my father, and transferred into their shared account. No authorization, no dialogue, simply gone. Ethan's social media displayed images from that journey, him smiling by the Colosseum, savoring wine in Tuscany, captioned, "Finest guardians ever." Meanwhile, I had borrowed a friend's academic book that term, too impoverished to acquire my own. The initial reaction was shame. How gullible I had been, believing they had simply neglected to offer assistance. Then came the rage, intense and sharp, at how they had transformed my opportunity into his escapade without a hint of remorse. I didn't confront them again, not yet. I printed the records, placed them into a file, and allowed the resentment to build. It wasn't merely the funds, it was the deception, the manner in which they kept me uninformed while I struggled, presuming I would never inquire. They had gambled on my quietness, my tendency to manage, and they had succeeded. But that revelation fractured something within me. Seated in my confined dwelling, the refrigerator's low hum my sole companion, I understood this was not an isolated oversight. It was a calculated, cold appropriation. And it aligned too perfectly with the painting, the neckwear, the years of being marginalized. My hands trembled as I shut the folder, not from apprehension, but from a burgeoning determination. They had taken more than currency. They had taken a part of me I hadn't even realized I possessed, and I would not permit it to conclude there. Subsequent to discovering the depleted education savings, I found myself unable to cease investigating. It resembled tugging on a loose thread, each pull revealing more. A week later, I spontaneously examined my credit history, anticipating the typical student debts or an overdue phone bill from years past. Instead, a $20,000 loan stared back at me, initiated 2 years ago under my name, linked to a marina address unfamiliar to me. My spirit plummeted. I had not authorized any agreement, nor had I possessed an automobile of such value. I contacted the financial institution, my voice strained, and after an hour of departmental transfers, they verified it. My autograph had been falsified on a loan for a vessel, with payments deducted from an account I did not manage. I swiftly assembled the facts. My father's social media displayed images from the previous summer, him and Ethan on a polished white motorboat, living what he captioned as the dream. My mother smiled in the background, her hair flowing in the breeze. I had liked the post, thinking nothing of it, assuming it was a rented craft. Now I understood, they had exploited my identity, my unblemished credit, to finance their aquatic excursions. The repercussions struck me months later when I sought a new residence, a respectable one, an upgrade from my dilapidated studio. My application was rejected. Credit concerns? The proprietor explained. I had been blacklisted because they had defaulted on payments, leaving my rating severely damaged. Fury surged, more intense than the sting of the college fund revelation. This wasn't merely money they had appropriated. It was my prospects, my opportunity to establish a secure foundation. I had been staying on friends' sofas after a job loss, meticulously saving every penny, while they navigated Lake Michigan, completely unaware. I retrieved documents from the boatyard, aligning dates with the loan, and discovered electronic messages where my father boasted to a friend about clever financial arrangements. My name served as their evasion, my confidence their guarantee. They hadn't even inquired, simply presuming I would never become aware or be concerned. I sat on my uneven mattress, papers scattered, and felt the full impact of it all: the painting, the savings, and now this. They hadn't just relegated me, they had exploited me, emptied my existence to bolster their own. My hands tightened. The singular documents, the falsified endorsement, a provocation in dark ink. But the fury subsided into something more resolute, more distinct. I began an accounting book, every exchange, every falsehood, cross-referenced. And orderly. It was insufficient to merely rage or disappear. They had erased me, certainly, but I was not yet a phantom. Thanksgiving was approaching, and I would enter that dwelling with more than a dessert. I would bring the unvarnished reality, acute and irrefutable, and observe their reaction. The Thanksgiving evening wore on, the sound of plates diminishing as my mother prepared coffee and Ethan browsed his phone near the fireplace. I had said little since the meal, the scarf still crumpled in my jacket pocket, my pie undisturbed on the counter. The painting shimmered beneath the overhead light, that tree ridiculing me with every upward glance. I waited until they were comfortable, my father in his armchair, my mother tending to cups. Then I reached into my satchel. The account book felt substantial, a weighty pile of documents I had secured with a clasp, each sheet a component in the structure I had erected. I pushed it across the surface, the noise piercing their conversation. "Examine it later," I stated nonchalantly, aware they would not. My mother's brow furrowed as she retrieved it, as if it were an overlooked invoice. "What is this?" she inquired, already unfolding it. My father leaned closer, coffee steaming in his hand, while Ethan barely looked up. For a moment, there was only the rustle of paper, then an abrupt, profound quiet. My mother's hands trembled as she turned past the financial records, the university fund withdrawals stark in black and white. My father's jaw clenched at the boat loan documents, my falsified signature highlighted in crimson. Ethan finally took notice, scowling. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice sharp. They offered no reply, their gazes darting over the ledger as if it might retaliate. I rose deliberately, my voice unwavering. "That encompasses everything. The funds you appropriated for Italy, $15,000, which I never saw. The loan you falsified for your vessel, ruining my credit. I have initiated fraud reports with the financial institution, it is concluded." My mother's cup struck the table, coffee spilling. "Sweetheart, this isn't, it was for everyone," she stammered, but her gaze was wide, trapped. My father scoffed, slamming the ledger down. "You're exaggerating this. We didn't intend." I interrupted him. "You intended it. You simply didn't believe I would discover it." Ethan stood, his face flushed. "Are you implying I'm the antagonist? That journey secured my employment." I turned to him, composed yet frigid. "No, my money secured you that journey. My name secured you that vessel. You're welcome." He blinked, his mouth agape, no retort prepared. My mother's voice fractured. "We didn't wish to burden you. You were always so self-reliant." I nearly chuckled. "Self-reliant because you afforded me no alternative. You removed me from that wall, from your existences, and exploited me to finance them. That ceases now." My father's chair scraped backward. "You have no right to criticize us. You've always been prone to exaggeration." I met his stare. "Exaggeration? Falsifying my name, pilfering my prospects? I'm not soliciting your perspective. I possess the evidence." The room became motionless, the fireplace crackling in the background. My mother's hands entwined, tears welling, but I felt no inclination to console her. Ethan stared as if I had struck him. My father merely breathed heavily, his fists clenched. I grasped my coat, the ledger remaining splayed on the table. "Retain it," I stated. "You'll require it when the bank contacts you." I exited, the door clicking shut behind me, their voices ascending in a muffled jumble. My chest heaved, not with triumph yet, but with something unrefined, a blend of sorrow and liberation. They would perceive me now, not as an indistinct presence or a tree, but as the consequence they had never anticipated. The frigid air struck my face, and I inhaled deeply, savoring liberty. I did not glance behind me as I departed that evening, the Thanksgiving cold biting my cheeks as I entered my compact car and drove away. Their voices, my mother's pleas, my father's bluster, Ethan's bewilderment, receded into the engine's drone. I had delivered my statement, leaving the account book like a detonated explosive, and that sufficed. Over the subsequent week, I concluded the fraud investigations with the financial institution, reclaiming what I could of the educational fund, a few $1,000s they hadn't expended, and disentangled my name from the boat loan. The marina seized the vessel, and I was indifferent to its next mooring. My credit was not restored, but it was once more my own, a fractured path I could begin to mend. Information filtered back through a relative a month later. My father sold the boat at a deficit, complaining about unappreciative offspring to anyone who would listen. Ethan's nascent company dismissed him, citing stress from family conflict. On social media, seeking unforthcoming empathy. My mother undertook additional shifts at a craft establishment, her self-esteem wounded but intact. I neither celebrated nor mourned, I simply continued forward. With the recovered funds, I rented a modest dwelling 2 communities away, a single bedroom, a narrow balcony, no murals on the walls. I painted it myself, a gentle blue that resembled the sky, and acquired a used desk for my programming tasks. The initial night, I slept on a mattress on the floor, no creaks or sounds from above, and awoke to a silence I could truly inhale. Weeks transitioned into months, and I constructed a stable existence. Patrons gradually appeared, my inbox chiming with minor assignments that covered the rent. I cultivated herbs on the balcony, basil, thyme, observing them extend towards the sun. The resentment I had carried diminished, not vanished, but softer, like a radio turned down. I occasionally checked my device, half anticipating a message, but none arrived, no apologies, no demands, merely absence. And I allowed it to settle. A university acquaintance once visited, noticed the bare walls, and inquired if I missed them. I shrugged. Missed whom I believed them to be.